Thank you. Welcome to our third event tonight. We do have a few new faces in the room, so I'm going to highlight just a couple of our room rules. And one is that you may not have any campaign literature or t-shirts or pins in the room. We keep this room nonpartisan. And another is that you should make sure your electronic devices are turned off, that we will hold any applause until the close of the event. And if during the event you have additional questions that you'd like answered, you can fill out one of the note cards that are available in the back, or maybe you already have. Hold it up, one of our volunteers will pick it up and review it and bring it out to us. We have the candidates for House District 25B with us tonight, and they have drawn numbers to select who will go first with their opening statements. Their opening statements can be 2 minutes. The answers to their questions can be 1 minute. The closing statements, 2 minutes. They each have 3 rebuttal cards. They have a limit of 3 rebuttals during tonight's event. 1 rebuttal, only 1 on any given question. And the time limit on the rebuttals is 30 seconds. Everybody ready? All right, let's get going. By drawing numbers, Mr. Bradley has, let me introduce you. First of all, running for this seat is Mr. Dwayne Sauk and Fran Bradley. And Mr. Bradley will go first with his opening statements.
Thank you all for being here. I guess I better have this. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to the League for sponsoring this. It's just another opportunity for you all to get familiar with the candidates, and that's terribly important, whether knocking at doors or whatever it is, that you just get to know us. Dave Senjum said something about JCs. I was a member as well. And what draws me to being here, and after 10 years of retirement, really is that line that service to humanity is the best work of life. It is that call to service is why I am back and why I sit in front of you today. It's easy to make promises about what you're going to do, a lot harder to demonstrate with testimonials. And I just want you to know some of the great friends that have been testimonials for me that represent important constituencies, I think important to everybody in this room. For example, ARC Minnesota, which is a major advocacy organization for persons with disabilities, awarded me twice with the Legislator of the Year. ARM, which is a group home representative, has awarded me as well. Mental health associations and NAMI have awarded me. The nursing home associations have awarded me as a legislator. And it spans all the way to the Taxpayer League and the National Federation of Independent Businesses and Farm Bureau. These are active, important constituents that have a wall in my office that is what I sort of would call my testimonial wall, because those people and those constituencies are always important and remain important to me. I'm grateful for them. I think it is an indication that I believe I can offer service and I can make a difference. Thank you.
Mr. Sauk.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this event. It's a particularly significant public event to have candidates be open and expressing their feelings and their points of view on all of the different questions that you're about to ask. After meeting voters at the door almost every day since March, I've heard several key topics. Most importantly, people expect legislators to build relationships of cooperation and achieve goals that help everyone locally and statewide. That's my attitude too. And to help Ann Gridleck at the House of Representatives, my approach will be to reach across the aisle and avoid being narrow-minded in my views and discussions with other legislators. I will seek and welcome ideas that share varied solutions to the challenges. We must support the most valued things that voters expect from elected leaders in St. Paul. I commit to being a legislator who joins into dialogue in a respectful and collegial manner with a goal of joint solutions. One of the things as I've gone through my experiences, we all have those experiences that shape us. It's built of relationships that we've had along the way. And those relationships then shape us as we move through our career. It shapes how we think, it shapes the values that we have as we then try to serve society. So that's where I find myself now after having careers I'm now at that point where I was retired, and I got an opportunity to step out and share my time, share my stories, share my expertises that basically all of you have given to me by using our company, by talking with me, by coming to meetings and sharing your ideas as I walked around in your neighborhoods. So I'm here hopefully to be transparent and open and clear about the way I think, and hopefully that helps you in making your decision.
Thank you. Our first question comes from the League of Women Voters. How do you plan, and we'll begin with Mr. Salk. How do you plan to fund the $6 billion hole in transportation needs in Minnesota over the next 10 years?
A specific 10-year window? I think one of the things is obviously to first and foremost start with a plan to actually do that. One of the things that is true is that we're working with a deficit which is growing, and unfortunately with our inability to come to agreement, we are having a hole that's getting bigger. And so what we have to do is we have to expedite that. There are two things that we have at our disposal to do that. One is to use money that we have in terms of the money that dropped to the bottom line this year and created an excess balance. That money, probably the most conservative thing you could have done with it would have been build roads and bridges. I know there was an agreement and a hope that that would happen, but there was not that effort to get it done. So we end up almost slipping back again for another couple of year biennium. Those projects need to get started. It has to be early in the agenda, and we have to use that money. I think then also finding dependable long-term streams of income or revenue are the ways that that would happen.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Well, first of all, the legislature did in fact almost conclude, and it was a bipartisan agreement in transportation for what the funding would do. It might be considered that it was a kind of a short-term stopgap, but it was bipartisan. And then at the last minute, a handful of people threw a monkey wrench in on an issue that had really not been heard during the legislative session. Now, back to the 10-year, and I don't think any of us can give. There's certainly no question about how important transportation is to us. That's a given. Everybody agrees to that. I happen to believe that we have to start thinking a little differently. The gas tax as a source, as an almost single source, one, it's very regressive. Secondly, it's not very reliable. The whole change in technology has changed the landscape. And so the idea of beginning to assign monies that are part of the general fund for those things related to cars and transportation, and then to constitutionally dedicate, I think is an idea with merit.
Thank you. Our next question from the League. If elected, what would your role be in creating a respectful workplace among other legislators, and how would you achieve it? And we'll begin with Mr. Bradley.
Thank you. I think that's really important. My lifestyle was built around honesty, respect, and common sense. And I chaired probably one of the most complicated and difficult committees, that is Health and Human Services, for a number of years when I was in the legislature, and I exercised those principles every day. And this is all about personal behavior. This is all about living respect. This is about being able to have difference of opinion, because that's going to happen. I mean, I think before there's been some talk about the whole business of democracy really is that people come together with different views. And to be able to have different views, but to differ it in respectful kinds of ways, and not to go sort of personal in it, is all at the foundation of it. And I just believe that I've lived that, and I would continue to live that way.
Thank you, Mr. Salk.
Well, I think there's two-pronged issue that took place. I happened to watch the legislature this year, and I saw this game of chicken coming from the very beginning. There was a certain amount of strategic holding over of bills that were going to be held until the final day, or for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill, is the phrase that was used, time after time after time, and these bills keep rolling backwards until they get to the final day, and you've got this game of chicken that's going to happen. It was constructed to a large extent. So I think that how does somebody like myself, just a farm kid that just grew up in Minnesota and had a few breaks, how does that impact these legislators? I think you have to go in, make it clear that you don't participate in that sort of delayed decision making. One person won't do it. 2 or 3 will start to gather the voice. more and more will gather because it starts to be the thing that everybody does want to do. They want to have something happen and not wait for the last day. So I think it is by building a consensus of people that want to move things forward and then enacting them.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the post bullet. We'll begin with Mr. South.
Southeast Minnesota residents buying health insurance in the individual market face the highest premiums in the state. What should lawmakers do to address these rising insurance costs?
Someone? Yes, sir. Well, I think that there are some clear things that were done, constructed, that are exacerbating the problem. So first of all, that would be this zoning system that was set up. It's clearly not in our best interest that as we live in this area. We're the part of the state that has accumulated toward these higher rates. Very predictable. That's also going to be one of the more difficult things to reconstruct or change in the legislature because they were offloading costs toward us. And so with knowledge of what their goal and structure was, I think you have to start moving into that. There are some other elements of this, and some of it would have to do with drug costs, some of it would have to do with trying to control drug costs by various kinds of methods, whether it would be putting the drug purchasing into places where you could leverage a large purchase. Those kinds of efforts also will bring that down.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Well, you're touching on something that I hear an awful lot about lately. I had a constituent just a couple of days ago tell me that he tried to sign up through MNsure. The MNsure program told him that he had zero income, which he knew very well wasn't the case, but he couldn't fix it through the system. The county has hired 5 more people to manually handle MNsure. So there's a problem on the portal that is MNsure. On the cost side, literally I've talked to agents who say they've had people in tears, literally in tears, because they've seen virtually a doubling now over a couple of years in their premiums and then very, very high deductibles. There's Band-Aids being proposed, which is just deeper into the taxpayer pocket. I think that's very dangerous if we can do it so we don't continue. But we need to look at things like perhaps bringing MCHA, the risk pool, back, because that was a solution Minnesota had before that's now gone. And that meant those people didn't get mixed into the pool, which I think has added greatly to the costs. We need to do better.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the Chamber of Commerce, and we'll begin with Mr. Bradley.
Should the governor call a special session after the election to pass the tax bill, bonding bill, and to fix MNsure?
I'm glad you said after the election, because I'm really skeptical about before the election. It is election season, it's politics. I don't think it's away constructively, so I think it does need to wait until after the election. That's only a couple of weeks away. I would say that if we call it right now, we call it to deal with the insurance problem primarily. And because that's complicated enough. To try to have a special session that's multidimensional like that, I'm not sure you can craft all of the agreements sufficiently to do that. So I would probably narrow it. If you can really craft ahead of time and have ironclad agreements so that when you come in, you almost just vote and that's it, I'm fine with all of those issues. But the big one right now, it is really a crisis, is the health insurance cost business.
Thank you, Mr. South.
Yeah, I think it's fairly straightforward. I don't differ from that a whole bunch. The process is that first and foremost, a special session would assist in, well, first of all, quieting the hearts of a lot of people that are right now struggling with this question. It would just bring some relief to the problem, and the legislature has the ability to do that. If that comes up, I agree that it would be better if it is purely the health insurance fix or for this particular thing, the bridge into long-term discussion. That would be good. If the others are done and can be put into the package, I think that I could understand there being a feeling of the current legislators that they would like to package those and put that into the finish column, which was left unfinished before. I agree that the chances of the human beings that couldn't quite get it done before getting there would be just interesting to see. It would be quite a move.
Thank you. And related to healthcare, we'll begin with Mr. South. What are your proposals for funding mental health services in communities?
I think this is what I think is going to be the state's major discussion for probably years to come, is trying to improve and to change toward better care in the whole constellation of things that are covered or not covered under the mental health care solar system. There are a huge number of things there. The cost of this is going to be significant. It's going to be extraordinarily complex. And so this will take time. Early, probably mostly we should deal, I think, with probably the issue of the salary of caregivers. That would probably be the thing that would release the most care, give them the most movement in the system toward a place that people are actually receiving better care.
Mr. Bradley.
Well, it's an issue that has so many different dimensions, reaching all the way to our criminal justice system, where we can acknowledge that in jails are people who are there because of mental illness. It's reaching into people with addictions where mental illness, co-occurring problems occur as well. And it's one that the governor has appointed a mental health task force, because I don't think it's about just throwing money at it. We have parity now in insurance like we should have. The big deals is do we have the people, the staff, the trained people in order to deal with these complex issues? And I would say this is an opportunity here to work on a bipartisan basis, because this is not party-based. This is a problem for our society. And how much money, I don't know. But I think we have to agree that we're going to do it. We have to have knowledgeable, smart people really get to the core of what the core issues are. I served on Zumbo Valley Mental Health, even was president of that association. So I have some understanding, but I wouldn't pretend to be able to know all what needs to be done.
Thank you. Our next question concerns affordable housing. We'll begin with Mr. Bradley. Affordable housing is a major concern for working families. Many families are spending more than a third of their income on housing. What do you see the state legislature's role in addressing the issue of affordable housing?
Well, before I get to the state's level, and I don't know that the state really has a responsibility in this area, but we need to look hard at what's driving the cost of housing. And there are factors driving the cost of housing. I happen to be the president of a townhome association. The builder was ready to build on 2 lots, stopped, because the cost of fees, the cost of regulation made the building such that it would not have been sellable. That's kind of a typical problem. So that's one. On the other side, of course, we are going to provide housing grants. We're going to provide HRAs. We have a county that's been given the authority to tax. So there's money coming in. We also have to think regionally. It isn't just about living in Rochester. My first home was in Casson because that was the only affordable place for me. There is nothing wrong thinking regionally. We have 30-some thousand people today who commute into Rochester. Perhaps part of the affordable part of it is other communities.
Thank you, Mr. Salk.
The challenge with housing, some of it is in the words at the policy level, and we use the differences between subsidized, affordable, and then there are other words that get cast about that are not so helpful in the discussion. There is a general agreement that affordable housing has a metric in the system that would be like 30% of income. That doesn't work cleanly and it does not work purely. And the challenges of supplying housing that are affordable housing would probably lay in 2 pathways. One is the pathway that would be the state making certain that the state housing is funded. Make sure that that's funded. The second thing then is to back a bit off on some of the regulations, because regulations have become a little oppressive as you are developing and building houses.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Mr. Salk. Political action committees and other independent spenders are infusing large sums of cash in election campaigns since the Citizens United decision. What changes to Minnesota campaign finance laws and practices are warranted in the light of this trend?
The only thing that I think would apply, a significant but very subtle change, would be to daylight the source of funding for state offices. Because the state really cannot, except for the finance board, cannot control things that have been set by the Supreme Court. So the Citizens United is law of the nation, and it is an understanding of the law, and that part of it is going to have to be managed either on a challenge of the Supreme Court or a written statute coming out of the Congress. But in Minnesota, there can be some addition of disclosure of source of funds on Minnesota races that then I think would at least cause that money to be revealed to the public, allowing the public then to make judgments based on what they see. And that's probably the only influence that the state can do right now.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley.
This comes pretty close to home. The last check I made, and I don't have an up-to-date numbers, but that on the independent expenditures, my campaign was being outspent by about 4 to 1. You know what? For the candidate spending, we have a pretty darn good system with good controls, good limits, good reporting. The independent expenditure thing, though, is totally out of control, and frankly, it distorts the campaigns. And I know the constitutional question, I understand the Citizens United, but it would seem to me if all things were according to what I have, if I just sort of ignore some of that constitutional question, all the money would have to pour through the candidate, and the candidate would have to be accountable. That you can't hide behind some independent expenditure. That would be at least what I hope we somehow do.
Thank you. For our next audience question, we'll begin with Mr. Bradley. What needs to be done, and what would you do to make the state legislature complete its work on time? And without legislature, the legislators faced with getting 500-page bills in the last hour of the session that they cannot read adequately and then be expected to vote on.
Well, yeah, I have thought a lot about that. I'm not sure, you can try something, but remember, anything that you try in terms of rule, the legislature generally can pass and override. I mean, you can sit there and have a rule that say it has to be done by a certain time, and then you have a consensus that the legislature, the House, or the Senate can change that. But ideally, to me, you would really look back. The big thing that seemed to hold up for me anyway when I was chairman was a thing called targets. You could not really make a final move on even policy things unless you had your targets for each one of the areas. That, it would seem to me, needs to be moved back so that when you have conference committees meeting at the very start, the targets are there, because you have to have some kind of targets, because you got to manage across all the budgets, but get them to the committee chairs a lot earlier, and I would say probably at least 3 weeks before the end of session.
Thank you. Mr. Selk?
I agree that the process of changing where action is required to happen would be if you can discipline it, it would be the thing that would change. If you can make the rule and the leadership can uphold the rule and don't get themselves voted over, then, and you say it's got to be there a week before or 3 weeks before, that does improve it. It improves it markedly. It's as I think you also said, is that he who makes the rules can change the rules. And so, in every sense, and I think we've all heard it at some point along, somebody standing up and saying, if or without objection, then such and such will happen. That's essentially setting aside any rule that may be in the pathway, and everybody then is agreeing to step around the rule and move forward with the action at hand. So it's the people assembled who are saying, yes, I will go along with changing the rules and going back to something else. So it's a human problem.
Thank you, Mr. Selk. We're going to begin with you on the next question. Are there any changes you would like to see in Minnesota's immigration policy?
I think this is the issue that Minnesota has struggled with for a while, and it has probably been a little, I'll say a lot, too tight relative to addressing the issue of immigration. We've had both housing and, in terms of housing, it was a labor issue, and this goes back to when I was president of the State Realtor Association, that this issue of Minnesota's own policies on immigration were getting in the way of allowing and getting the free flow of labor to come in, be able to come into the state and work. So it's a very straightforward thing. We must be much more open and accommodating. We have to let go of some of the insidious fears. They are no longer founded, and it's time for us to allow our economy to expand and to allow the labor forces to grow.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley.
Thank you. Had some experience with a number of exchange students that lived with us, and were smart, were valuable, would be great assets to our workforce, but it was hell getting through the system. But it was virtually all federal. I mean, we had Supreme Court, a former Supreme Court justice trying to help us work our way through this system. And so a lot of it is really the federal bureaucracy, if you will, that seems to prevent the business of being able to help people who legitimately are working within the system, legally, but are finding it a huge barrier.
A rebuttal? Yes, sir.
Get a hold of my card. I just want to bring up a topic that I think fits into this space, and it has been part of this particular dialogue, and that has to do with the issue, with the state's current understanding of how it is going to give driver's license. Driver's license for immigrants and or families that have just moved here becomes the tool by which you enter into the labor force. That has been a little arcane and a little archaic in the state, and I think the state needs to have the dialogue and move that forward.
Thank you. Next question is regarding education. We're going to begin with Mr. Bradley. I'll sit there. What is your position on school choice and vouchers so families can choose between state-run public schools and non-profit-run private schools, and non-profit-run public schools?
Well, I understand totally the value of our public education system. It's helped move our society along in very important ways. But to be just hung up that everybody has to go to public school is not recognizing that there are people who need alternatives. We just had a Somali getting appointed event, and it was held at the STEM Academy. The charter schools, by and large, have been very successful in providing people with alternatives. The home schools have been very successful. For certain people, work extremely well. I stopped short of full-fledged vouchers, but I do think that we need to be open for people having choice.
Mr. Selk.
I think that the system we have in the United States is one that is less than perfect, but clearly something that has served the country very well. And within that system, it is to continue to support and uphold the idea of a public education system. There are trade-offs with that. There's no doubt about that. There are challenges that some people are not all served, and I think it's good to have these pathways for individual opportunity, whether it would be at a charter school, homeschool, magnet schools. There are lots of different versions of it across the United States. I think they are all exceptionally important in terms of people and families individually being able to act out their choices for education. But in the United States, our education system is still one of the strongest in terms of giving every child that opportunity to have a good education.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mr. Selk on the next question. Is there anything that the state can do, what would it be that the state can do to improve the disparity of graduation rates between students of color and white students?
Although I didn't agree with the governor's specific proposal, I think he is at the right place. I think that the most significant thing that we in education, and I used to be an educator, so that's why I think of it as we, the educators, and the school systems. We need to get up to date with how kids are developing. Kids at the age of 4 are ready for learning. They are ready to start tackling broader elements of cognitive thinking. And they can then move through life and be more successful as they would go through the school system. So they need that opportunity. How we deliver that, like I said, I just don't buy the governor's full proposal. For various reasons, schools weren't ready for it, the systems weren't ready for it, but we have a private delivered preschool education that is deliverable right now, and I think we need to leverage that.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Well, what we call the achievement gap is a blight on our society. And money doesn't seem to have solved it. If it did, the Minneapolis and St. Paul school districts would be the best performers because they are receiving the most money. I happen to believe that you really have to dig back on the achievement and look back to what's behind these students. Do we really understand where they're coming from? We can't necessarily expect the education system to be the solution for broken families. We can't expect education system to be the solution for abuse or neglect or whatever else it may be. Somehow, when we have so many broken families that kids are coming from, we have to figure out how do we reach back and help those kids and help open the door of opportunity for all of them. And it isn't just in the education system. I think the failure we make at times is we think it's all about the education system. It isn't just that.
Thank you. Our next question, beginning with Mr. Bradley. What is your position on preventing individuals with a history of domestic violence from owning a gun?
Well, the fact that,
Touch the bottom again.
okay,
Whoops.
again, nope. Does that mean the battery?
Let me check.
Testing, testing. No. No. And I'm an engineer. Forgive me. Well, let me frame this. I have a permit to carry. I went through the process. That process checks you all kinds of ways. So in the normal process, and I think most people go through that, it already does differentiate that. I can't imagine anybody, including me, that supports the notion of somebody who's a domestic abuser having a gun. I don't. And they don't get them if they follow the process. Now, I know there's those who say, well, all we have to do is just do more gun control. And that part, I think we're kidding ourselves. The places that have the tightest gun control, like Chicago, have the highest incident of gun violence and deaths. So I don't know that I would really change anything because I think we already have the controls, and I don't see through the legitimate processes. The illegitimate processes, people are going to do that no matter what we do, no matter what the barriers are.
Thank you, Mr. Soak.
First of all, I think Chicago's a false example. It has characteristics and structures in it that are just not really appropriate to be compared. The part that I think is straightforward here is the core question, and that really begs the issue of should we, once that has been determined, and or there's the structure from enforcement or from social services understandings, those kinds of things, a gun probably needs to be relieved from the person because there is violence that has been demonstrated, and having a weapon in that environment is a danger to the party who is being accosted. So I think that there's more to it than just the purchase side of it. I do think that there should be greater gun control relative to a full and complete gun background check.
Thank you. Mr. Soak, you can begin this next question. Do you support high-speed train from Rochester to the Twin Cities?
I chuckle, yes. So who's gonna buy it? And where's it gonna be, and how's it gonna run, and all that sort of thing. So I only chuckle in the fact that, yes, we would all like to have it. And I think there are lots of reasons that we would think it's a good thing if it was there. The getting there is gonna be the real challenge for us as a society. If it's going to be the private one that we're hearing in the news right now, that somebody else is gonna buy it, put it up as a business proposition, well, that's a good thing. That's what I think we are all part of. I think that there are some impediments of the reality of getting the right-of-ways, getting the system to be built and that sort of thing. So that is going to be a challenge. But do I approve of it? Yes, if it can somehow be built and figured out how that structurally will take place. The thing is in the details. That's going to be the problem of getting it done.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Well, I'd probably start from the opposite side. I'd start out by saying no. And it's not a thoughtless no, because I can be convinced otherwise, but I just think that, yes, if the private venture really works, but I think we as taxpayers need to be pretty skeptical about that. What happens if it bellies up? What happens if it gets built and then operationally goes into deficit? Who's going to be holding the problem with the purse with that? And I'm frankly worried that it will ultimately be the taxpayer. Just because something would be kind of nice and cool and wouldn't it be nice to be able to ride does not necessarily mean that there's a really sound business case. Insofar as it being a private venture, and if we can really, really hold to that private venture being then totally liable, okay. But I begin with skepticism.
Thank you. Our next question is an environmental one. We'll begin with Mr. Bradley. Excuse me. What is your view of protective measures already in place for Minnesota lakes and rivers, and what additional measures would you advocate putting in place or removing?
Well, I happen to be a river rat. I spend a lot of time on the Mississippi River and on lakes, and so I have, as I think everybody here, an appreciation for our waterways and for clean water and drinking and our other uses. But the question becomes then, so what are we doing? Well, I think the start point of having buffers on the major waterways, I don't have a problem with that. And by the way, we did most of the places. I also know a lot of farmers, and the farmers that I know are very, very conservation oriented, so I don't think that they need a whole lot more against them. To have buffers on something where you have maybe a runoff in a couple of times a year began to be impractical, and I think was a detriment to farmers, and I think that's why you began to see the farmers pushing back. As is the case in so many things that can sound good at the outset, it comes down to common sense and really doing some objective analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Self.
I think that what happened was there was an uneven application of the law as it unfolded, and in Olmsted County, as it turns out, the advisors, the regulators, the people that are in the system got the ball rolling, and the farmers were well ahead of the laws, deadlines, and that sort of thing, and so they have essentially been in compliance at each step and as it was coming. So the ability for it to be fixed and changed is within our grasp. I think there are places where that did not happen, and then there was great misunderstanding, there was some uneven application, and some counties or areas were not treated well in terms of how to bring this online. I agree that farmers by nature, my background being growing up on a farm would tell me that there is nothing more important than the ecology of what it is your life is, keeping the land.
Thank you. Moving on to a tax question. We'll begin with Mr. Salk. The Minnesota tax system has moved from progressive income taxes to more regressive property taxes in recent years. What is your philosophy on taxation?
I think that the movement into the regressive property tax is a function of largely, not exactly, but largely a function of the state having things that have to be done and yet not funding them. not providing the funding. And the counties and the schools are the recipients of this in the strongest way. Counties have great responsibility for the state. They are the acting arm of the state in the delivery of a number of services. And the state has not funded them up to the point causing and pushing the county to go into property taxes. Similarly, school districts breaking into the funding of this funding stream for the schools has been a probable habit and has created times when the school districts are uniformly now starting to go to the property tax in order to get that. We need to move that backwards and get it back up into the state general fund so that at that point the funding is available.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
I'm not convinced, to be honest with you, that in recent history that we've moved a bigger load onto the property taxes. If you look at our counties exercised a wheelage tax and a sales tax that was given that authority. The LGA has actually gone up, local government aid has actually gone up. Now, if we look at, and I won't pretend to know all the things in our city, but the city just, if I read it right, passed an initial levy authorization for upwards of 11%. Now the word is, well, maybe it will come back down. Well, holy smokes, that's a mighty high target in a time when the inflation rate is just a couple percent. So I think we also have to hold our local governments accountable, really. So I guess I'm sort of questioning the basic premise, really, and I think we need to hold accountable at all levels.
Thanks. A quick question about the election, the election system. Is it rigged? Oh, that's not really a question. Mr. Bradley, I'll begin with you. What new legislative initiatives would you support to strengthen and protect our election system and encourage voter turnout?
I'm not so sure we have to do a whole lot more in terms of voter turnout. There's great promotions that go on both political parties. There's great promotions that come out of the Secretary of State's office. Minnesota has, at least in the presidential years, some of the highest turnouts in the nation. So I'm not sure how much more. The event yesterday with the Somali community was an effort to reach sort of a non-traditional group, to help that group feel as though they're part of it as well. So that part we can do, I think. I do question, and I know there's a lot of difference of opinion in this, but I have personally experienced, by being an election judge, some very questionable practices. I think we also need to be sure that the opportunity to vote is also upheld in a legal and proper way.
Thank you, Mr. Stout.
I think that Minnesota has just recently, in fact this year, it is the first year of its full enactment is the early voting and the robust process by which now people can extend the act of voting outside of that one election day, and that has probably been the most significant and the strongest improvement to improving voter turnout. I think we will find that in succeeding years, and it may take 3, 4, 5 years before we actually see this become robust, but we are going to see the highest participation that we've ever seen because of the fact that it becomes much more convenient to do. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that.
What new legislative initiatives would you support to strengthen and protect the system and encourage voter turnout?
Okay, the protection of the system, I think Minnesota is very strong in trying to sort that out. I mean, they have made every effort. As he mentioned, we have judges at all of the sites, and I think that they are doing very good work. I think that if there are things that are happening that are questionable, our judges are handling them, and it doesn't mean that the system's bad. It just means that it's working.
Thank you. It's time for our closing statements, and Mr. Bradley will go first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, again, a repeated thank you to all of you being here. Nothing pleases me more than knocking on a door and somebody actually wants to engage in a thoughtful discussion. And it doesn't happen frequently enough. So I appreciate the fact that you all are interested enough. I'm going to take a little bit different course. I was out by my post office box today, and the mailman went by and said, "Holy smokes, I am really almost every day busy with delivering mail from your opponent. And oh, by the way, a lot of it's negative." And we talk a lot about civility. I don't know how you can discuss civility in the legislature when you have 8 direct mails coming from the DFL party attacking me with really distorted, negative attack ads. I don't know how you can have civility in the legislature when you have on the radio and now on TV I'm hearing distorted, negative attack acts. I don't know how you can continue to say, I mean, when you see things that says, as a state representative, Fran Bradley has a consistent record of taking from our schools and jeopardizing our children's education. I voted for increases in education every year I was there. One year that we had a horrible deficit, we had to do a shift. So the reality is he's consistently voted for, but the document says he voted consistently against. It says that I think we should have daycare centers are great places to bring a gun. Come on. It also says that Fran Bradley thinks domestic abusers should be able to buy guns. I'm sorry, folks, but I think those are just ridiculous claims, and they do not have to add to quality. I wanted the campaign in 25B to be a campaign that we could all be proud of. But it appears as though the DFL party, I know these are independent expenditures, but it's people that are close to my opponent, the DFL party and the DFL House have not been civil.
Thank you, Mr. Selk.
It is always interesting to use a series of examples and leave out all the examples that would be on the other side. That's always convenient and easy. So if you want, I'll deliver those for you. They all are out. They've all been delivered. They're all negative about me. I don't think, never have thought, and never have blamed Fran for those items. The mail is full of them. We talked about that earlier. Independent expenditures do what they want, how they want, when they want, and deliver it at their will. And there is nothing you can do about it. There's a firewall. I was confronted personally about this, saying, well, you should go tell them what you want. Well, he said he did. Yet there are still a bunch of them out there. So let's set this thing aside. I think it's horrid. I would do anything, but it isn't available. So that, as far as that diatribe about what somebody else has said, I am sorry about that. I feel like it is a horrible change in our voting process. But there is no way that it's only his or only him. It's on both of us, and it's independent, things that we can't control. So, in favor of not having a closing statement, there you go.
And you have a rebuttal.
I'd be happy. I wish we could have them in front of us right here and compare. I have seen, by the way, those, and I instantly called the parties that I could to tell them I do not condone it, I condemn them, and please stop. Now, you're right. Dwayne's right. We can't directly control, but we can certainly send strong signals. But I've looked at them. The nature is different. They do ask questions about the support for gas tax, for example.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our questions and closing comments. Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for running for office, for submitting your personal life and energy to the public service. Thank you all for coming tonight and for offering up good questions. I'd like to remind you all here and those that are watching on the video later that the opinions expressed tonight are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters of Rochester. I'd like to thank the Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Rochester Post-Bulletin and the Rochester Public Library for supporting us tonight, for helping us tonight. Do not forget that 2 weeks from tomorrow is Election Day, November 8th. Early voting has started. Don't forget to do that either early or on the day. If you have a question about your polling place or you'd like to see your sample ballot, go to mnvotes.org. That's mnvotes.org. If you put in your address, you'll be able to pull up your ballot and you'll be able to find your polling place. If you would like to see this form again, you can access this through the Rochester Public Library's website. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.